Hello, my dear emperors. I'm Marco, and tonight we're drifting into the story of the Persian Empire, I guess. Why, I guess? Because this isn't your usual history lecture. Here, we don't just talk about the Persians, we speak as if you were one of them. This is a second-person journey, immersive, a little sarcastic, and meant to carry you gently into sleep while your mind wanders through time. From ancient Zagros caves to Tehran's skyline, from the flicker of Zoroastrian flame to revolution's roar, this story doesn't tiptoe. It begins on the stony slopes of prehistory. So if you're up for it, let the world fade, dim the lights, and join me. You're barefoot again, aren't you? The morning chill creeps up your ankles as you step outside your mud brick hut, because footwear apparently is a luxury still a few thousand years away. The land around you is green and strange, nestled against the folds of the Zagros Mountains, a place so ancient it makes Stonehenge look like a startup. The air smells of goats and wild onions. The year, just about 8000 BCE, give or take a few centuries, because calendars aren't really a thing yet. You live in Choga Golan, which will one day be Iran, but for now it's simply home, or as you like to call it, that place where I try not to starve. You squat down beside a patch of barley, your pride and joy. You and your clan have recently discovered that planting things in one place is somehow less miserable than wandering around all the time looking for berries. It's revolutionary, really. The world's first farmers are emerging, and somehow, without realizing it, you're part of a global trend: sedentary life. Historians still argue whether agriculture was a brilliant idea or just a clever trap that locked humans into backbreaking labor. But too late now, you've already got calluses. Nearby, smoke drifts from the hearth of another hut, your cousin probably trying not to burn his lentils again. There's no writing yet, no kings, no wars, and shockingly no internet. It's just you, your kin, your barley, and the occasional terrifying animal. You've learned to store grain in clay bins, and you've figured out that clay, when dried just right, doesn't disintegrate like, say, leaves. It's a thrilling time. Sometimes you even get visitors from other nearby valleys, travelers probably just as confused about agriculture as you are, but eager to swap obsidian blades or wild stories about the spirit world. By 7000 BCE, your descendants start getting fancy. They build more permanent structures, learn how to work copper, and get into this strange obsession with burying their dead with tools and beads, probably to impress the afterlife's customs officers. Religion in some embryonic form begins to whisper into your dreams. Maybe there's a mountain god, or a river spirit, or maybe it's just the fermented barley talking again. Down the line, your people start constructing large mounds, what modern archaeologists call tells. They're not cities yet, but they are growing communities, layered in time like a sediment cake of human ambition. Each new hut is built atop the ruins of the old, a practice that future generations will find both poetic and frustrating to excavate. The rhythm of your days is mostly dictated by the seasons and the moods of your animals. You measure time in sunrises and moons, not in TikToks or election cycles. There's a kind of peace in it, unless the neighbouring tribe decides your goats look particularly delicious. But beneath the quiet hum of village life, something else is brewing. Farther west, over in Mesopotamia, people are starting to really accelerate this whole civilization thing. Ziggurats, writing, beer, and as their influence starts to push east, you'll soon have to decide, do you stay quaint and sleepy, or do you join the madness of progress? By the time you, or rather your many great-grandchildren, start experimenting with pottery styles and grain domestication, the first faint outlines of what might become Elam are scribbled onto the clay of history. But for now, you're still just trying to get the fire started without burning off your eyebrows. And at this messy, glorious, humble beginning is where the Persian story truly starts. Not with a crown or a conquest, but with a seed planted in the soil and the long, slow miracle of staying put. But your goats are bleating again, and there's barley to check, so the rest of the tale can wait. You've been promoted, not in any modern sense. No salary raise, no corner office, no better parking spot for your donkey. But your community is growing, and with it a sense that maybe, just maybe, your muddy little village has potential. Welcome to the highlands of Elam. The Zagros haven't changed much. They're still jagged and moody. But now they echo with more voices, more pots clinking, more livestock negotiations, and yes, more problems. It's around 2700 BCE now. You're no longer just a humble villager. You're an Elamite, which sounds cool until you realize no one outside your valley has heard of you yet. But you don't care about the opinions of others, not when you're busy chiseling out one of the earliest complex societies in history. That's right, you and your neighbors are about to build a kingdom before the word kingdom was trendy. You live in a region nestled between two civilizations that will become the Beyonce and Jay-Z of ancient power. Mesopotamia to the west, and the rising cultures of the Iranian plateau to the east. You somehow get the best and worst of both worlds. You trade with Sumerians, borrowing their writing system, and they borrow your metalwork, which is a polite way of saying they occasionally pillage it. It's fine, it's historical networking. The capital, if one can call it that, becomes Susa. Yes, the same city that'll get name-dropped for centuries, like a timeless celebrity cameo. At this point, it's growing into an urban center, with ziggurats that rise in awkward competition with Mesopotamia's smoother models. Your priests perform rituals involving divine goats and suspiciously vague incense. Your rulers begin to carve their names in Elamite cuneiform, which will baffle archaeologists for millennia. Historians still argue whether the Elamite language even had relatives. It seems to have shown up with a suitcase and no explanation. You're probably a craftsman, or a farmer, or maybe even part of a local militia, because borders in this era are as flexible as your cousins trading promises. You worship deities that are both fierce and practical. Pinikir, goddess of love and war, because in Elam, why not have both? The spiritual and the brutal coexist, just like your ceremonial beer and practical spears. Politically, the Elamites never seem to get the one big empire memo. You've got city-states, shifting alliances, and the occasional dynastic confetti fight. Kings and queens rule in cycles that often overlap, contradict, or just disappear without warning. It's like Game of Thrones, if Game of Thrones had more goats and fewer dragons. Sometimes your rulers bow to Mesopotamian kings in polite diplomacy. Other times they sack their cities and steal their gods' statues for a cheeky century or two. The gods, for the record, never seem pleased. You get quite good at metallurgy. Bronze becomes your forte, and your artisans are in demand. The mountain people, their beards thicker than their diplomacy, rely on your region to supply tools, weapons, and ritual trinkets. Susa becomes a hub of trade, and you begin to realize that power doesn't always come from swords. It sometimes comes from clever export tariffs. But just as you're basking in your highland cultural glow, disaster always looms like a dinner guest that refuses to leave. The Mesopotamians, your moody neighbors, don't enjoy being outshone. Hammurabi and his ilk occasionally knock on your gates, not with treaties, but with battering rams. One of your kings has to sue for peace by marrying off a daughter, and another decides to just raise a few towns instead. You know diplomacy. Yet despite the violence, the Elamite identity clings on like burrs to a cloak. Even when Susa gets conquered, it often comes back. Even when your gods are stolen, you replace them. Even when your writing system gets bullied by Akkadian scripts, you scribble in Elamite just to be stubborn. You're not a flashy empire with golden roads and global ambitions. Not yet, but you are something older, something grittier, a culture that whispers in its own tongue, dances to its own rituals, and builds cities that never stay down for long. The Elamites become the quiet architects of Iran's historical personality, resilient, regional, and allergic to full-scale obedience. So you continue to rise with the mountain sun, chisel your dreams into brick, and live in that peculiar tension between isolation and influence. You're Elamite. You don't need the world's approval. You're too busy surviving in style. And as your torches flicker in Susa's ancient alleys, the next chapter waits, humming quietly in the river winds. You wake up to the sound of something distant, and yet unmistakably familiar, the clang of bronze tools, the rhythmic shuffle of feet on packed earth, and the low guttural mutter of a foreign tongue. You're still in Susa, technically, but something's shifted. The air smells less like roasted barley, and more like Mesopotamian ambition. Welcome to the awkward and sometimes aggressive friendship between the Elamites and their western neighbours, the Mesopotamians. It's about 2300 BCE now, and the land is abuzz with news from the west. The Akkadian Empire, under the charmingly unrelenting Sargon the Great, is doing its thing. That is, unifying, conquering, and occasionally renaming things that didn't ask to be renamed. And now, Elam is in his sights. You, a humble citizen of this historically misunderstood culture, suddenly find yourself annexed into what some call the world's first empire. Congrats. Sargon storms through like he owns the place, which, briefly, he does. The Elamites are pulled into this imperial spaghetti of cultures and scripts, and your people get a crash course in Akkadian administration. You learn that empires, like overly ambitious startups, expand fast, make wild promises, and eventually crash when they can't keep up with logistics. Historians still argue whether Elam ever fully accepted Akkadian rule, or just played along until Sargon turned his back. Of course, the Elamites are not ones to sulk in the corner. Within a generation, they're staging uprisings, reclaiming cities, and pretending like the Akkadian phase was just a fever dream. In fact, they adopt and remix some Akkadian practices, because imitation, after all, is the sincerest form of cultural subversion. You scribble in Elamite on Akkadian tablets, worship your gods in ziggurats built with foreign blueprints, and chuckle quietly every time an Akkadian noble trips on your temple steps. Meanwhile, down in the lowlands of Mesopotamia, your frenemy neighbours are deep in their own civilizational soap opera. Sumerians versus Akkadians, Gutians popping in for chaos, and city-states flipping alliances like clay tokens. You watch from your hilly perch, sipping goat milk and wondering how they manage to build empires with the attention span of a caffeinated squirrel. Still, contact with Mesopotamia isn't all bad. You trade goods, lapis lazuli, tin, elaborate drinking horns. You borrow architectural styles and mythological motifs. A few brave souls even intermarry. And over time, this cultural tug-of-war becomes less about conquest and more about influence. You begin to see Mesopotamia not as a threat, but as a particularly noisy neighbor with a really good bakery. By 2000 BCE, the power dynamic starts to shift again. The Elamite dynasties reassert themselves, with a capital E empire forming under the Shamashki, and later the Suqumar dynasties. Susa gleams again, not with Akkadian arrogance, but with Elamite tenacity. The kings revive local traditions, commission epic inscriptions, and make it clear Elam is not a footnote. Elam is a headline. One king, Shatrok Nakhunte, becomes especially memorable, not just for his formidable name, but because he decides to storm Babylon, take the famous stele of Hammurabi, and haul it back to Susa like a historical trophy. The message is clear: we see your laws, Babylon, and raise you one monumental power move. And yet, despite these moments of glory, Elam remains a paradox. Not quite Eastern, not quite Western, not fully absorbed, never fully dominant. It's a land where languages blur, traditions merge, and power pulses in cycles rather than lines. A place where time folds inward like a clay tablet still warm from the scribe's hand. As night falls, you sit under the starlit Zagros sky, pondering your place in this world of shifting empires and stubborn cities. You're neither Akkadian nor Sumerian, you're Elamite. A cultural crossroads, a survivor of empires, a whisper in the grand narrative that never quite fades. And tomorrow, new footsteps will echo from the steps. The next wave is coming. You don't hear them coming at first, just a flicker in the horizon, a strange shift in the way the wind brushes the plains. But then you spot them, riders, not kings with golden robes or priests mumbling over ziggurats. No, these are nomads, broad-shouldered, bearded, and with a curious love for horses and fire rituals. They're called Aryans, not in the modern, unfortunately hijacked sense, but as in actual Indo-Iranian tribes wandering down into the Iranian plateau from the steppes. And if you thought Elamite life was complicated, buckle up. It's somewhere around 1500 BCE now, and you are part of a culture undergoing a massive, invisible transformation. The Aryan migration doesn't come with the loud smash of conquest. It seeps in slowly, like wine, into porous stone. You, a settled farmer, or maybe a low-ranking scribe in the old Elamite order, now find your neighbours speaking unfamiliar dialects, worshipping gods you don't know, and offering sacrifices that smell suspiciously delicious. These newcomers call themselves things like Arya, meaning noble, and they bring with them a very specific cultural suitcase, chariots, sacred hymns, and a deep love for abstract thinking. Their priests chant verses that will one day become the Zend Avesta, though for now they're just poetic mutterings about fire, order, and the cosmic struggle between truth and lies. Historians still argue whether these migrants peacefully assimilated, subtly infiltrated, or simply married into the local elite, while exchanging notes on how to tame goats and gods. The landscape changes too. Villages stretch toward the plains. Pottery morphs. Burial customs evolve. The Elamite language begins to fade from daily use, replaced gradually by old Iranian dialects, precursors to Median and Persian tongues. You, whether you like it or not, are becoming something new, something hybrid. The plateau isn't just a place anymore, it's becoming a crucible. You notice that power is more dispersed now. No single empire holds sway. Instead, there are tribes, lots of them. Some call themselves the Persians, others the Medes, and even more splintered names dot your mental map like unformed puzzle pieces. They herd animals, yes, but they also form councils, swear oaths by fire, and speak of things like fate and eternal struggle. They're tough because the land demands it. Cold winters, dry summers, and neighbours who steal goats if you blink too long. These Aryan tribes are not just random drifters. They come with social structure baked into their stories. You've got warriors, priests, and farmers, each with roles, rules, and gods to match. There's no single king yet, but power exists, held by clan leaders and elders whose authority is rooted in tradition, not stone palaces. It's more tent than throne room, more fire pit than golden court, and yet it works. The gods themselves are shifting. You hear names like Ahura Mazda whispered beside flames, and Angra Mainyu lurking in darker tales. There's a dualism here that feels different, less about pleasing one deity and more about choosing a side in a cosmic battle. Even your dreams feel weightier, filled with symbolism and the occasional flaming cow. You wonder if this is what philosophical awakening feels like, or if you just ate too much fermented millet. The tribal world is rich, textured, and frustratingly undocumented, so much as oral, passed down in chants and tales. There are no great stone inscriptions yet, no royal archives or tombs lined with gold, but there is culture, real, living, breathing culture, and it's settling in like a long guest stay that turns into permanent residency. Meanwhile, the Elamite cities shrink in power. Susa begins to dim, though it doesn't vanish. Instead, it absorbs and adapts. You see Aryan-style ceramics in its markets. You hear old Iranian songs echo in its courtyards. Cultures aren't dying, they're blending, and you, strange as it sounds, are now the ancestor of Persians, Medes, and everything in between. At night you sit beneath a moonlit sky, stars blazing like the many eyes of Ahura Mazda himself. You warm your hands by the fire, listening to elders speak of migrations, of mountains that once bled copper, and of battles not yet fought. The wind carries with it change, not a scream, but a steady whisper. The old world is ending, and the foundations of an empire are being laid, softly, almost imperceptibly. And somewhere in these hills, a shepherd boy will soon be born, whose descendants will shake the world. The hills are no longer quiet. Whispers of unity ride the wind like a secret only the bravest dare speak aloud. You feel it in your bones. Something is coalescing. The tribes once scattered like grains across the plateau are stirring with a purpose that no ancestor could have dreamed of. You, a chieftain's advisor in the rugged highlands, have begun hearing strange and unsettling words around the campfires. Alliance, kingship, Median Federation. It's around 700 BCE, and the Medes, your people, unless you've recently defected for better food, are finally doing what no group here has done for centuries, organizing. After generations of raiding, intermarrying, and feasting in suspiciously temporary treaties, the tribes are forming something new, a proto-nation, a cultural gravity well pulling scattered loyalties into orbit. Historians still argue whether this was driven more by external threat or internal fatigue, but either way you're living through the birth of the Median state. And it starts, like most useful chaos, with the Assyrians. Those delightful Mesopotamian war machines have spent centuries making a hobby out of flattening neighbors. They've got siege towers, psychological warfare, and a work ethic that would put modern corporations to shame. Every spring, they march into the Zagros foothills for what essentially amounts to organized looting with PowerPoint precision. Heads roll, cities burn, but eventually even tyrants get sloppy. Enter Dionysus. No, not a warlord, but a judge. That's right, your movement starts with a guy who's just really good at settling disputes. Word spreads that he's fair, wise, maybe even a little mystical. People start sending him gifts, petitions, and eventually armies. Before you can say tax structure, he's king, building a capital at Ecbatana and commissioning walls thick enough to make any Assyrian blink twice. You stand on a hillside, watching this city rise like a dream out of dust. Concentric walls in 7 colors, each one higher than the last, circling like a child's drawing of heaven. It feels impossible. It feels destined. You wonder if this is what empire feels like. Not just domination, but coordination. Deios rules not as a despot, but as a symbol. He doesn't micromanage your goat count or dictate your daughter's wedding dress. He governs through layers. Tribal leaders still hold sway, but now under a unified banner. There are roads, messengers, tax collectors who wear slightly better sandals than you. It's all very exciting, unless you're one of the people paying the taxes. After Dionysus comes Phraortes, and with him, teeth. This isn't just a court of laws anymore. It's a rising military power. The Medes begin absorbing their neighbors, not just with bribes and weddings, but with honest-to-goodness iron. You, now a grizzled veteran of 3 regional campaigns, have watched the army grow from a ragtag band of noble sons to a serious force. Chariots, horse archers, and the eerie sight of battle standards fluttering under one symbol. Then, in the kind of twist that only history can write, the Medes do what no one expects. They ally with the Babylonians. That's right, the former victims of Assyria team up, storm Nineveh in 612 BCE, and burn the great Assyrian capital to the ground. If revenge had a soundtrack, this would be it. And just like that, the balance shifts. The Medes, once tribal footnotes, now control vast lands, from the Zagros to central Anatolia. You dine in tents that host emissaries from Lydia, Urartu, and even the far lands beyond the Black Sea. You hear tongues you don't recognize, eat dates dipped in wines you can't afford, and wonder what comes next. But even in triumph, questions linger. The Median Empire is vast, but it lacks something. Structure, perhaps, or vision, or that irritating thing called administrative clarity. The tribal roots still tug at the edges, and cracks begin to form. You hear rumors of a minor vassal to the south, Persis, they call it, and a noble family there raising an ambitious child. You scoff at the idea. Surely the Medes will reign for centuries. Then again, you also thought goats couldn't climb trees, and we both know how that turned out. You blink, the firelight dances in your eyes, but something feels different. The Medes, once the thunder of the highlands, are strangely quiet. Their kings, who recently dined with Babylonian royalty, now seem preoccupied with silks and feasts more than swords and statecraft. And into this lull steps a man, young, precise, and inconveniently brilliant. His name, Cyrus, of Persis. And no, not the type to politely stay in his tribal lane. You're a Median noble now, or were, until very recently. Your position was cushy, your wine imported, your authority unquestioned. Then Cyrus started gathering followers like a travelling preacher with surprisingly effective marketing. At first you dismissed it, just another hill prince getting cocky, you said. But then entire satrapies began pledging to him. One morning you woke up, and your courier informed you that your lands now belong to the great king. You smiled awkwardly, nodded, and quietly packed your bags. It's around 550 BCE, and the world is shifting under your feet. Cyrus II, who will later be called Cyrus the Great by everyone who's not a sore loser, isn't just conquering, he's reimagining empire. His genius isn't in crushing opponents, though he does that just fine. It's in convincing people they wanted to be conquered in the first place. He defeats the last Median king, Astyages, not through brutal siege, but through a clever rebellion and a suspiciously cooperative military. Historians still argue whether it was mutiny or magnificent diplomacy. Either way, it works. And suddenly, Persia isn't just a name, it's a movement. You now serve a king who wears no crown heavier than common sense, and whose greatest weapon is policy. Cyrus speaks of respect, of honouring local customs, religions, and gods. He returns captive peoples to their homelands. He funds temples that don't bear his name. He conquers with empathy, or at least with an incredibly convincing impression of it. You're sent as an envoy to Babylon, which is the current super prize on Cyrus's checklist. You expect a fight. After all, Babylon is impregnable, its walls tall enough to shame ambition itself. But when Cyrus approaches, something strange happens. The gates open. The priests, sick of their current king Nabonidus and his theological experiments, welcome Cyrus like a messiah. There's a parade, a proclamation, and absolutely zero burning. It's a conquest without carnage, an occupation that feels like a homecoming. You hold in your hands the now famous Cyrus cylinder, a decree in cuneiform declaring the king's commitment to justice, rebuilding temples, and letting the exiles go free. It's basically an ancient press release, but far more poetic. Modern historians will call it the first charter of human rights. You call it the most persuasive piece of state propaganda. Since that time, the Elamites tried to convince everyone goats could bless fields. And Persia grows, not by reducing cultures, but by absorbing them. Lydia falls next. Croesus, the fabulously wealthy king with a tragic weakness for oracles, gambles everything and loses. You're there, watching as Cyrus demonstrates not cruelty, but curiosity. He doesn't execute Croesus. Instead, he makes him a consultant. Honestly, it's kind of impressive. Cyrus's empire now stretches from the Aegean to the Indus. You're standing at the heart of the largest realm the world has yet seen. Roads begin to snake across deserts, coins appear bearing unfamiliar symbols, and messages fly faster than ever thanks to royal couriers on horseback. You, now a provincial governor under Cyrus, find yourself working alongside Egyptians, Jews, Lydians, and even a few suspiciously well-groomed Greeks. It's like an HR diversity poster, but real, and somehow it all works. Still, power is a fickle thing. In 530 BCE, word spreads that Cyrus has died during a campaign against the Massageti. Some say he fell in battle, others that he was ambushed. There's even a version where his body is displayed like a grim trophy. Historians, true to form, argue over every detail. What matters is that Cyrus, the founder, the liberator, the strategist, has fallen. You visit his tomb at Pasargadae, a simple structure, no towering statues, no ego in stone, just clean lines, enduring stone, and silence. It's humbler than it should be, and grander for that very reason. As you bow before it, you feel the weight of continuity. The Achaemenid Empire is no longer an idea, it's a reality, and Cyrus, even in death, is still assembling it, brick by brick, law by law. And tomorrow? Tomorrow someone else will try to wear his mantle. Good luck with that. You step into the marble shadow of Persepolis, not the Persepolis of later grandeur, not yet, but something foundational is humming beneath your sandals. Cyrus is gone, buried with less pomp than expected, and the empire is momentarily adrift, like a great ship that's lost its captain, but still carries enough wind to make you seasick. The succession isn't exactly smooth, because of course it isn't. Dynasties are rarely tidy. His son Cambyses takes the throne, and with him comes an ambition even taller than the empire's mountain fortresses. You're now an administrator, stationed somewhere between the Nile and the Zagros, sipping fermented date wine and scanning supply scrolls that suddenly demand double rations for Egyptian translators. Why? Because Cambyses is marching west, and fast. Egypt is in his sights, and apparently papyrus is now a required military resource. Cambyses conquers Egypt in 525 BCE, taking the title of pharaoh, as casually as one might pick up an extra cloak. You receive dispatches praising his campaign, which of course downplay the alleged madness, sacrilege, and cat-smashing fits that Greek sources love to harp on. Historians still argue whether Cambyses was truly unstable or just having a bad PR decade. Either way, he dies under suspicious circumstances. Some say suicide, others say infected thigh wound, still others suspect assassination. History, as always, refuses to confirm or deny. And then comes Darius. Darius the Great, if you're into titles, or Darius the Paperwork King, if you're more administrative like yourself. He wasn't next in line, nor even close, but somehow through a perfectly choreographed, spontaneous coup and a bit of divine favor, he seizes power in 522 BCE. You don't question it. You're too busy marveling at how the empire suddenly starts functioning like a very stylish, tax-efficient machine. Darius reorganizes everything. Satrapies are carved across the land, 20 of them each ruled by a satrap who is equal parts bureaucrat, diplomat, and nervous wreck. You're reassigned to one and given a handbook so dense it could double as a weapon. Every region pays tribute, every road leads to Susa or Persepolis, and every courier now has royal seal access and a surprisingly strict timetable. Infrastructure booms. Darius commissions the Royal Road, a 2,700-kilometre stretch that lets you send messages from Sardis to Susa in just over a week. You wonder how this is possible, and then you meet the postal relay system, horsemen stationed at intervals, with fresh steeds, satchels, and minimal social skills. They run day and night, storm or sunshine. Its efficiency meets obsession. You're also hearing about canals now. Yes, canals. Darius decides to connect the Red Sea to the Nile, which sounds like a fever dream until it starts working. Boats pass, trade flows, and Egyptians reluctantly admit they might have underestimated Persian engineering. Somewhere, a priest mutters about foreign gods getting too comfortable, but everyone else just enjoys cheaper grain. Still, Darius is not all spreadsheets and stone carvings. He's also keen on conquest. Around 513 BCE, he launches a campaign into Europe, aiming for Scythia. You hear it goes badly. The Scythians, it turns out, are not into standing still. They fight like ghosts, vanish into the steppes, and leave Persian supply lines tangled like yarn in a kitten's paws. Darius returns, undeterred, and sets his sights on the Greeks. Ah yes, the Greeks. Quarrelsome city-states with far too many philosophers and not enough unity. When the Ionian Revolt kicks off around 499 BCE, Darius takes it personally because he's Darius, and everything is personal. He sends fleets, he burns Eretria, and in 490 BCE he sends an army to Marathon. You hear the result a few weeks later. Persian forces repelled. A runner allegedly sprints to Athens to shout about victory before collapsing, though you suspect that's a Greek dramatization. They do love a good monologue. Back home, Darius is more successful. Persepolis starts to rise. You visit it as an old man, watching as artisans from across the empire lay stone, carve staircases, and raise columns that make gods seem underdressed. The imagery is clear: unity through diversity, empire as harmony. Each satrapy is represented in the carvings, bearing gifts. It's beautiful, a little idealistic, sure, but beautiful. And beneath it all runs Zoroastrian thought, not state-enforced, but ever-present. Fire temples glow in the hills. Ahura Mazda's name graces inscriptions. You hear whispers that Darius believes his power is divinely granted, not from conquest, but from his alignment with cosmic truth. You wonder, quietly, whether he's right. But time is always one step ahead. In 486 BCE, Darius dies, his legacy carved in stone and baked into tax scrolls across 3 continents. You attend his funeral, one of thousands, and stand among weeping Persians, solemn Babylonians, and slightly bored Medians. The empire doesn't stop. It doesn't even flinch. It simply shifts. And as Xerxes, son of Darius, ascends the throne with all the glory and all the pressure, you realize something. You're living in a machine, a glorious, glittering, fire-lit machine, and its wheels are only just beginning to turn. You sit in the flickering glow of a sacred fire, its flame dancing like a whispered secret. The temple walls are austere, not gaudy. This is no place for idols, just fire, ever living, ever watching. A priest chants verses in a tongue that seems older than mountains and newer than last night's dreams. You, a court scribe now reassigned to religious affairs, because bureaucracy in the Persian Empire includes divine administration too, are beginning to feel the tug of something deeper, something ancient, and frankly, a bit exhausting to decipher: Zoroastrianism. It doesn't start with Darius, of course, but he certainly gives it a stage. The roots reach back to a priest named Zarathustra, Zoroaster to the Greeks, whose life is so foggy with legend that historians still argue whether he lived in 1200 BCE or was just invented one night by particularly philosophical shepherds. But his message? That's fireproof. At the center is Ahura Mazda, the wise lord, champion of truth, Asha, and enemy of the lie, Druge. And no, it's not a Marvel plot. This is your actual theology now. You learn that the world is a battleground, not with armies and arrows, but with thoughts and choices. Every act matters. Light fights darkness, not with swords, but with intention. It's strangely empowering, and also pressure-inducing. You can't even water your garden without wondering whether you're tipping the cosmic scales. In Zoroastrianism, there's no chaotic pantheon bickering on a mountain. There are no idols, no sacrifices that involve more than clean firewood and recited prayer. It's orderly, ethical, almost bureaucratic in its moral structure, which is perhaps why Darius loves it. After all, this is the man who organized 3 continents like a tax ledger, a religion that prioritizes moral order, truthfulness, and civic responsibility. That's empire-friendly theology. Your role becomes increasingly spiritual. Every satrapy, it seems, wants their own fire temple. You review blueprints, scroll through prayer manuals, and once even mediate a dispute over whether a fire tended by a left-handed priest is still valid. Spoiler, it is. But don't tell the Magi that. You learn that there are 3 pillars to life now: good thoughts, good words, good deeds. It's easy enough in theory, but difficult when your neighbor keeps borrowing your oxen without returning them. Still, the moral clarity is refreshing. In a world of empires, betrayals, and suspicious assassinations, Zoroaster's dualism feels like a cosmic balm. What surprises you most is how this new faith weaves through the empire without smothering its diversity. Cyrus may have been a religious diplomat, but Darius gives it backbone. Inscriptions like the one at Behistun read less like divine praise and more like a corporate mission statement. By the favor of Ahura Mazda, I am king, I am just, I punish lies. You half expect to find a quarterly revenue report chiseled into the cliffside. Still, this isn't a forced religion. You pass through cities where local gods still receive offerings, where Babylonian astrologers mumble at stars, and Egyptian priests chant through incense clouds. Persia isn't a monolith, it's a mosaic, but Zoroastrianism becomes the ethical heartbeat, its whisper always just under the noise of trade and tribute. As you travel from Sardis to Sogdiana, you begin to see fire temples in unlikely places, tiny shrines nestled into cliffs, grand altars on hills that once hosted pagan rites. The empire breathes this new rhythm, subtle and strong. Even your dreams start shifting. You no longer fear vengeful gods with flammable tempers. You ponder choices, consequences, cosmic audits. And then there are the Fravashi's guardian spirits, ancestral presences. You feel them watching when you hesitate before a lie. You wonder if your grandmother's Fravashi is judging your sloppy handwriting on that royal tax decree. She probably is. One night, while resting along the royal road, you find yourself alone beside a fire, reciting the Asham Vohu, the ancient prayer of righteousness. The stars wheel overhead. The empire hums around you, a beast of stone and silence. And for a moment you feel something rare in your line of work, peace, not from conquest, not from promotion, but from alignment, a brief, perfect alignment with something more. You whisper thanks to Ahura Mazda, not because you're afraid, but because you understand, or at least you think you do. And then the fire crackles again, reminding you that the story isn't over. There's still a throne in Persepolis, and a king with unfinished plans. And very, very soon, Greece. The drums begin again. Not the slow ceremonial thud of royal announcements, or the percussive rhythm of harvest dances. No, these are war drums, loud, deliberate, echoing off the walls of Persepolis like a challenge hurled across mountains and seas. You, an aging records officer with more papyrus cuts than teeth, tighten your cloak. You know this sound. It means trouble. It means Greece. Xerxes has taken the throne. He's the son of Darius. But don't let that lineage fool you. He is not his father's clone. Where Darius was methodical, Xerxes is theatrical. Where Darius issued commands like math problems, Xerxes issues them like monologues. You suspect he may have rehearsed them in mirrors. And his first big act? Revenge. Specifically, revenge for Marathon. That little defeat, the stinging slap the Greeks gave to Persian pride back in 490 BCE, still lingers like garlic breath on an imperial banquet. Xerxes doesn't want to punish Athens, he wants to obliterate it. He doesn't merely gather an army, he builds a spectacle. Historians still argue about the numbers. Herodotus says millions, which feels like creative accounting, but let's just say it's big, really big. You find yourself at Sardis, watching soldiers from every corner of the empire arrive like floodwaters, Persians in scale armor, Medes with crescent shields, Ethiopians with painted bodies, Indians with cotton tunics and gold-plated arrows. You try to catalogue them, then give up after the 100th language you don't understand. It's like someone tried to host a military parade and a linguistic festival on the same day. The logistics alone are maddening. You help oversee one of the massive supply trains. Thousands of animals, tons of grain, enough amphorae of wine to intoxicate a small moon. The army crosses the Hellespont on floating bridges made of boats tied together, and just as you're starting to feel proud, a storm wrecks them. Xerxes, not one for subtlety, allegedly has the sea whipped. Yes, whipped, as in, bring me the lashes, we're punishing Poseidon. And yet, the bridges are rebuilt. The army marches into Thrace, through Macedonia, down into Greece. It's a slow-motion avalanche, majestic and mildly terrifying. Cities surrender just at the sight of it. Others resist. Athens, of course, chooses resistance, because they're Athens, and because they can't help themselves. At Thermopylae, you're there not on the front line, gods know, but close enough to hear the shouting and smell the grease of fear. 300 Spartans, or so the legend goes, hold the narrow pass against thousands. You see them fight like wolves, back to back, grim and unblinking. The battle becomes myth before it ends, but end it does. Xerxes takes the pass, and the road to Athens is open. You march into the city not long after, stepping over charred ruins and smoke-blackened temples. Xerxes orders the Acropolis torched. A message, he says. A message to whom, you wonder? The gods? The future? Himself? But the Greeks aren't finished. At Salamis, their fleet lures Xerxes' ships into a trap of narrow straits and sharp tactics. You watch from a distant hill as the mighty Persian navy flounders like a banquet of hubris served on seawater. Ships burn, soldiers drown, the tide turns, literally and metaphorically. Xerxes, perhaps sensing history sharpening its quill, retreats to Asia Minor, leaving his general Mardonius to handle the leftovers. It goes poorly. At Plataea in 479 BCE, the Persian land forces are routed. The dream of subduing Greece dissolves like sugar in wine. Back in Susa, the mood is complicated. The empire is still vast, the roads still run, the satraps still collect tribute, but something has shifted. You can feel it in the way people speak of the Greeks now, not as rabble, but as rivals, dangerous ones, inspiring even. You catch your son trying to sneak a Greek scroll into the house. It's poetry, he says. You sigh, partly because you're tired, and partly because the poem is really good. Xerxes turns inward. He expands palaces, builds monuments, adorns Persepolis like it's a bride awaiting judgment. You're reassigned there and walk the halls of golden lions and winged bulls. It's magnificent and oddly melancholic grandeur trying to outshine failure. One evening, as you walk the terrace overlooking the city, you realize something. The Persians have built a world, diverse, sprawling, brilliant, but they've also awakened another. Greece is no longer just a place, it's a mirror, and the reflection is both flattering and threatening. And so the fire temples still burn, the satraps still rule, but a new question curls through the empire, like incense. What happens when the world you built starts admiring someone else's? You watch the sun set behind the Zagros, casting long shadows over Persepolis, and you wonder, is it dusk or just another kind of dawn? You're finally home for once. No war drums, no frantic dispatches from some mountain pass where goats outnumber common sense. Just the hush of evening across the Iranian plateau and the steady gurgle of water flowing under your feet, because tonight you're walking above a quanet. Yes, a quanet, not a river, not a canal, but a brilliant subterranean aqueduct that pulls water from distant mountains to wherever your city happens to need it. It's the Achaemenid Empire's quietest revolution, and frankly, you're here for it. You lean down near a small shaft, where cool, clean water trickles into a sunlit holding pool. It's like plumbing before plumbing. These underground channels stretch for kilometers, defying gravity and the desert in equal measure. No fanfare, no columns or roaring lions, just centuries of sustained hydration. And this is how Persia thrives, not just with gold and swords, but with inventions like this, things that whisper instead of shout. You live in a town now, a proper one, with paved streets, markets, and a workshop where your cousin repairs chillers. Yes, chillers. Not the modern air conditioning kind, of course, but the ancient Persian yakhal, giant conical structures of mud brick that make ice in the desert. You used to think it was magic. Turns out, it's physics and a stubborn attitude toward summer. They funnel hot air out, store ice brought from mountains, and keep milk from turning into regret. But it's not just water and ice. The empire's cultural infrastructure is blossoming. You walk into a music house one evening where you hear a setar played so sweetly that even the local tax collector forgets to be unpleasant. Dancers twirl in patterns older than your grandfather's grudges, and poets recite verses under starlight so vivid you half expect Ahura Mazda himself to snap his fingers in applause. Artisans are everywhere. Weavers in Sogdiana dye silks in hues stolen from sunsets. Potters in Fars mix glazes that shimmer like dreams. Even your neighbour, who you're pretty sure can't count past 20, has started crafting miniature bulls out of ivory. Just for fun, and why not? Peace, however relative, inspires creativity. You serve as a mid-level overseer now, managing civic records, and occasionally refereeing disputes over who stole whose melon cart. You're fluent in 3 languages. You wear Babylonian sandals and a Median tunic, eat Bactrian dates with your Egyptian lamb, and wash it down with wine from Lydia. Your empire isn't just big, it's blended. Cultures don't just coexist, they co-compose. Even the satrap system, for all its bureaucracy, lets regions breathe. Local customs continue. Taxes stay mostly fair, and the king only writes when something goes terribly wrong or impressively right, which means you're left to live, to build, to sleep without one eye open. Most nights, that is. Still, cracks hum beneath the surface. You hear whispers in taverns that the court grows more decadent, that officials are starting to lose track of their duties, that royal coinage is being clipped just a little thinner than before. Historians will later debate whether Persian administrative systems were too brilliant to last or too fragile to survive brilliance. But you ignore that, for now, because today a merchant from Bactria just gifted your son a flute made of lapis lazuli, because the Qanat still flows, the Yakhal still cools, and the fire temples still burn, because Persian daily life isn't about grand victories anymore. It's about quiet mastery. At twilight you step outside to the roof of your house. Below, children chase each other across the square, their laughter like punctuation on the day's final sentence. Above, the stars emerge in familiar constellations, Ahura Mazda's night lanterns, reminding you that order and beauty are not luxuries, they are goals. You breathe in the scent of roasted herbs, fresh bread, and a world at relative peace. Not perfect, not eternal, but right now, worth writing home about. And somewhere far to the west, a boy sharpens his sword. One day he'll march east, convinced he can improve on what already exists, but that can wait until morning. The morning light feels sharper today, like the sun is watching you more closely than usual. Maybe it's nothing, maybe it's just age, or maybe it's the fact that an army has arrived from the west, led by a man whose name already trembles on lips like a prophecy wrapped in bad news, Alexander. You'd heard rumors, whispers carried by merchants, dramatized by poets, ignored by officials. A Macedonian prince with a divine complex and an annoying habit of winning everything. He won't come this far, you told your cousin. He'll get bored or sunburned. You really should have stopped making predictions. It's 334 BCE now, and Alexander of Macedon has crossed the Hellespont. First it was Asia Minor, then Issus, then Egypt, where he let the locals call him a god, because of course he did. Now, after humiliating your general Darius III at Gaugamela, he's heading for the heart. Babylon falls without a whimper. Susa opens its gates, and Persepolis burns. You stand at the edge of the terrace, ash falling like dead snow, the great columns now blackened ghosts. The city, the symbol of imperial grace, of cosmic order turned into stone, has become a funeral pyre. Some say Alexander wept as it burned, regretting the destruction. Others say he threw the first torch during a drunken party, egged on by a companion dressed as Artemis. Historians still argue whether he mourned Persia or merely wanted to wear its skin. And yet, Alexander does something unexpected. He doesn't just conquer Persia, he marries it. Not metaphorically, literally. He takes Roxana, a noblewoman from Bactria, as his wife. He orders mass weddings at Susa, uniting Greek officers with Persian noblewomen like it's a mandatory mixer. He adopts Persian dress, honors Persian gods, even sits on the royal days, awkwardly at first, but eventually with some flair. You, a once proud Persian court functionary, are offered your job back. Same scrolls, same taxes, different accent at the top, and so you serve again, because empires don't really end, they just change costumes. Alexander's vision is not to erase Persia, but to fuse it with Greece. Hellenism spreads not like a plague, but like a remix. Greek-style theatres emerge beside Zoroastrian fire temples. New cities bloom, Alexandrias, mostly because modesty is not his thing. These are cities of libraries, marketplaces, and unlikely friendships. You drink wine with a Spartan, debate astronomy with a Babylonian, and trade riddles with a young Greek merchant who asks too many questions about your daughter. Culture does not disappear, it interlaces. Persian roads remain, Persian engineers still build, Persian myths find their way into Greek epics, reshaped, rebranded, retold. Even Ahura Mazda starts showing up in philosophical conversations about order and chaos. But for all the fusion, there's tension. The Greeks don't love bowing. The Persians don't love loud banquets and naked wrestling. And Alexander, he begins to crack. The man who once raced from battle to battle now drinks more than he commands. His temper turns lethal. Old friends die under suspicious circumstances. You watch him walk through Susa one morning, eyes bloodshot, speaking to someone who isn't there. Then, in 323 BCE, it ends. Babylon, a fever, or poison, or divine exhaustion. Historians, ever dramatic, list every theory. What matters is this: the empire has no clear heir. The dream shatters before the mortar dries. The generals, his diadochi, split the empire like a roasted lamb. Seleucus takes Persia. The Seleucid Empire is born, and you get a new boss. Again, you barely bother to unpack your office scrolls now. Still, life continues. You grow older. You teach your grandchildren to read both Aramaic and Greek. You tell them stories of Darius, of Zoroaster, of Conquests and ice domes. You even show them a coin with Alexander's face and whisper, he was real and maybe a little mad. And on quiet nights, you remember Persepolis before the fire, the soft light on its polished steps, the smell of incense, the songs sung in 4 languages at once. And you wonder if Alexander ever understood what he conquered, or if he too simply dreamed in flames. Time, that ever-patient sculptor, has carved new faces into old thrones. You, now more storyteller than scribe, have watched Persia transform again, this time into a Seleucid project, a sort of Hellenistic franchise with too many managers and not enough charm. The empire founded by Seleucus I is vast but brittle, like a golden bowl used for boiling soup. It gleams, yes, but it cracks under the heat. You're in Ecbatana these days, semi-retired and occasionally bribed with dates and flattery to teach younger officials how to properly sign a document without invoking 3 conflicting calendar systems. The Seleucids have done what they can to maintain order. Greek cities dot the land, gymnasiums pop up next to fire temples, and coins bear the image of Zeus, where Ahura Mazda once whispered. You've stopped being surprised. The Seleucids are not without merit. Their cities are grand, their roads functional, and their libraries almost competent. But you can sense their struggle. They don't quite understand Persia, not the heartbeat beneath it. They imitate Persian pomp, mimic Persian rituals, even try their hand at Persian administrative brilliance, but it feels like someone trying to wear your clothes backwards. Greek elites rule from walled cities, while local populations retreat into old customs. You hear Zoroastrian prayers whispered behind amphoras, Avestan chants float from hillsides during moonlit rituals. The empire is bifurcated, two minds in one body. Historians still argue whether the Seleucid strategy was fusion or simply distraction. And then there are the Parthians. You first hear of them as raiders, eastern tribes, causing trouble in Margiana and Bactria. They're rough, rural, and wildly underestimated. Their leader Arsaces declares independence around 247 BCE, which seems cute until he starts winning. Over decades, the Parthians push west, reclaiming territory inch by stubborn inch. It's not grand conquest, it's erosion, a drip of resistance that eventually splits stone. You meet a Parthian trader in Ragae. He's polite, curious, and far more educated than your old prejudices expected. He speaks Persian, Greek, and something from the steppes that sounds like wind chimes and wolf growls. His robes are plain, but his horse is magnificent. You realize, suddenly, this isn't a barbarian. This is the future. By 140 BCE, the Seleucids are shadows. The Parthians, now calling themselves the Arsacid dynasty, have taken over much of Iran. They don't burn the past, they bend it. They adopt Persian royal titles, perform Zoroastrian rites, and mint coins that bear Greek and Iranian symbols side by side. You're both baffled and impressed. They rule loosely. Satraps return. Regional kings hold sway. It's a confederation more than an empire. You write a letter for a friend, now working under a local Parthian governor. It's addressed in 3 languages, sealed with a signet that hasn't changed since Darius. Continuity, it seems, is the true Persian strategy. But even as power shifts, the daily life continues. Qanats are still maintained, fire temples still burn, yakshols still store winter's breath. The empire may change its face, but Persia keeps its soul. You live long enough to see Parthian horses defeat Roman legions at Carrhae in 53 BCE, a stunning reversal that makes you laugh for the first time in weeks. The mighty Romans, so used to linear conquest, caught in the Parthian bowman's dance. It's a reminder, terrain matters, so does patience, so does knowing where to find water in the desert. And as you sit under the stars one last time, surrounded by grandchildren who think Seleucus was a bakery, you realize something: Persia does not vanish. It adapts. It bends, absorbs, reinvents. The names may change: Achaemenid, Seleucid, Parthian, but the thread holds, a silken line running from mountain to market, from fire altar to starlit road. You whisper a prayer, not for power, not for peace, but for memory. May they remember the waters you walked above, the cities you watched rise, the empires that mistook conquest for permanence. And may they, too, learn the secret Persia taught you long ago. To endure is not to remain unchanged. It is to change wisely. The world doesn't explode when Rome enters Persia. No great quake splits the Zagros mountains. No gods scream from mountain tops. What happens instead is far more Persian, a measured resistance, an adjustment of tactics, and a sharp eye on long-term endurance. Because you've lived through Seleucids and Parthians already, and if there's one thing Persia excels at, it's waiting empires out. The Parthians are in charge, technically, but their power is like a tea ceremony in a sandstorm, elegant but easily scattered. They control through feudal lords, kinship ties, and enough political flexibility to make jelly seem rigid. You, now the village historian and occasional wedding speech ghostwriter, witness this up close. Nobles rise, squabble, and fall with the same frequency as harvests. The Arsacid kings rule from Ctesiphon, which is more of a luxurious encampment than a capital, but it works for them. Rome, across the Euphrates, is growing impatient. You see it in the Roman envoys that pass through town, their armour too polished and their Latin too smug. They want Persia, its roads, its silk routes, its bragging rights. They consider themselves the successors of Alexander, but forget that Persia isn't just land, it's layers, and those are harder to conquer. In 53 BCE, You're just old enough to remember Crassus's failed campaign. The Roman general marches east expecting a quick victory, and instead gets Parthian horse archers turning his legion into Swiss cheese. The Battle of Carrhae becomes a cautionary tale, proof that heavy armor is useless when your enemy rides circles around you and never stays put. Historians still debate whether the Parthians won with superior tactics or just exploited Roman arrogance. You shrug. Why not both? Still, the pressure continues. Rome and Parthia dance a long, uneasy waltz. Armenia becomes the ballroom. One moment Roman-backed kings rule there, the next its Parthian allies. You track these shifts on a clay board in your study, placing markers with weary resignation. Each war, each treaty, each puppet ruler, it all starts to feel like an elaborate game of who wants to be a hegemon. And yet, Persia persists. Your town sees Roman coins, Greek plays, Parthian archers, and Zoroastrian priests, all in the same market square. You hear rumors that in the east Han China is aware of Rome and Parthia, referring to you both as distant partners in silk and suspicion. The world is now linked by threads of trade, diplomacy, and espionage, and somehow your dusty village is right in the middle of it. But something begins to shift inside Persia itself. A slow, internal tremor. The nobility grows bolder. The kings grow weaker. You attend court one day, and the tension between regional lords and the aforesaid king is so thick you could slice it with a butter knife and be arrested for treason immediately after. The system that once gave Parthia flexibility now makes it fragile. You start hearing a name in whispers. Sasan. Not yet a king, just a priestly figure with royal ambitions. His son Ardashir begins rallying support in the south. It starts small: temple reforms, tax complaints, petitions for stronger governance, then military victories, then open rebellion. By 224 CE, the Sasanian dynasty is born. Ardashir topples the last Arsacid king and declares a return to Persian greatness. But this isn't just another regime change. It feels different, sharper, intentional. You're too old to fight, but you write letters, analyze proclamations, and raise an eyebrow at how quickly temples are being renovated. The Sasanians bring centralization, fire temple orthodoxy, and a new attitude toward Rome, one that's less passive-aggressive and more aggressively aggressive. They position themselves as heirs to the Achaemenids, not just in style, but in ambition. You find this both nostalgic and terrifying. As the empire shifts again, you light a fire in your garden and sit beside it. Children chase each other in the dusk, not caring if the king's name changes, only if their bread stays warm. You realize Persia doesn't resist change. It digests it, incorporates it, outlasts it. Rome may still loom to the west, but you know how this story usually goes. They come, they conquer, they commemorate, and then they leave. Persia, though, Persia stays. The Sasanian Empire rises like a phoenix, but with less feather fluff and more iron discipline. You find yourself under new management, which means new rituals, new taxes, and new worries. The capital is now Ctesiphon, a city straddling the Tigris like a luxurious jewel, its palaces gleaming, its fire temples burning ever brighter. You walk its streets, feeling both the weight of history and the urgency of the present. This isn't just Persia reborn, it's Persia on steroids. The Sasanians take Zoroastrianism seriously. State religion status, mandatory fire worship, and priests with influence that rivals even the king. You, who've seen religions come and go like fashion, watch as theology becomes politics. Heresy is no longer just a theological problem. It's a matter of state security. The empire's rulers present themselves as guardians of cosmic order, champions of Asha, truth, fighting against chaos and evil, embodied by the rival Roman Empire to the west. And speaking of Rome, the old rivals are back at it. The border along the Euphrates is a constant chessboard, with cities like Nisibis and Dura Europos changing hands more often than you change your sandals. You attend council meetings, where generals argue over supply lines and whether to risk another costly siege. Wars between the two empires aren't just military, they're theological, cultural, even economic. You're reminded that conflict for Persia isn't just about land, it's about identity. At home, the empire is flourishing in other ways. Art and architecture reach new heights. Rock reliefs carved into cliffs depict royal triumphs and divine favor with such detail that you can almost hear the clink of armor and the murmur of prayers. The city of Bishapur boasts a blend of Persian and Roman styles, a testament to cultural fusion born of conflict. You find yourself sketching some designs, wondering if future architects will marvel or mock your crude drawings. Science and philosophy also bloom. You hear of scholars studying medicine, astronomy, and alchemy, fields where Persian intellect shines. The Academy of Gundashapur becomes a beacon of knowledge, attracting students from across the known world. You dream of libraries filled with scrolls, not yet burned or lost to time. But beneath the grandeur, tension simmers. Religious minorities, including Christians and Jews, navigate a complex web of tolerance and suspicion. You witness debates in the marketplaces about faith and power, wondering if Persia's strength will be its inclusivity or its divisions. Women, surprisingly, enjoy relatively significant rights compared to many contemporaries. You hear stories of noble women who manage estates, patronize the arts, and influence politics from behind velvet curtains. It's a quiet revolution, often overlooked in the grand narratives, but vital nonetheless. Yet as you walk through the bustling bazaars of Ctesiphon, you can't ignore the whispers. The Turks and nomads from the steppes are stirring again, challenging borders and sapping military resources. The empire's vastness is both a blessing and a curse. It offers riches, but invites envy and invasion. You light a fire in your chamber one evening, the flames flickering like old memories. Persia's story is far from over. The Sasanians have rekindled a flame that will burn bright for centuries, shaping the fate of a region caught between worlds. And as you gaze into the fire's heart, you realize the empire is like the flame itself, resilient, radiant, but always at risk of being extinguished. But that can wait until you wake. The Silk Road isn't just a trading route, it's a lifeline, stretching from the dusty deserts of Persia to the jade mountains of China. You're a merchant now, balancing silk bolts against pots of honey, listening to tales of far-off lands that sound like fairy tales, with less sugar and more dust. You trade not just goods, but ideas, stories, and technologies. The world is vast, but Persia is its beating heart. Along these routes, caravans carry more than camels and coin. They bear inventions, paper-making from China, Greek medical texts, and a tantalizing smell of spices that promise magic or indigestion. You marvel at how knowledge flows as freely as silk, weaving cultures together in a tapestry far richer than any single empire. Baghdad has emerged as a jewel, though you're not yet aware it will become the capital of the Abbasid Caliphate later. For now, it's a bustling trade center where scholars debate geometry, astronomers chart stars, and poets craft verses that dance like flames. You hear of paper mills, where the fragile medium that will preserve knowledge for millennia is being produced for the first time outside China. It's a revolution quieter than war, but no less powerful. In your travels, you encounter maps that are a blend of Greek precision and Persian artistry. The world is mapped not just in geography, but in myths and dreams. You learn about algebra, introduced by scholars like Al-Khwarizmi, and optics, where light bends and dances under inquisitive eyes. Science feels like a great river, swelling and flowing, ready to reshape everything. Religion intertwines with learning. You hear of Manichaeism, a faith that attempts to unite the wisdom of Zoroaster Jesus and Buddha, a spiritual smoothie that intrigues and threatens established orders. It spreads quietly, embraced by some, feared by many. You're torn between curiosity and caution. Meanwhile, rulers in Persia, now under the Abbasids, invest in grand libraries and hospitals. You visit a clinic where patients receive treatments that blend ancient herbal remedies with emerging medical science. It's a world where faith and reason coexist in a delicate dance like fire and water, sometimes clashing, sometimes harmonizing. The arts flourish. You watch musicians play the oud and hear stories that mix Persian epics with Arabic prose. The 1001 Nights begins its journey, a collection that will captivate imaginations far beyond Persia's borders. You smile at tales of Aladdin and Sinbad, knowing that even as empires rise and fall, stories endure. Trade routes link east and west, north and south. Silk, spices, ideas, and faith travel faster than armies. Persia becomes not just a land, but a conduit, a bridge between worlds. And in this vibrant exchange you see Persia's greatest strength, its ability to absorb, transform, and radiate culture like a well-tended flame. As night falls, and you settle beside a flickering lantern, you realize that empires may perish, but the light of knowledge and culture can glow on, quietly changing the world. And that, dear Emperor, is a story worth dreaming about. The sands shift, as do the tides of power. Persia, proud cradle of empires, now faces an unfamiliar storm, not from the swords of men, but from the crescent of a new faith sweeping across the desert winds. The Arab conquests arrive with a speed and fervor that unsettle even the most seasoned scribes. You, a seasoned Persian official, now living in a city tinged with both nostalgia and apprehension, watch as the world you know begins to unravel. It's the 7th century CE. The Sasanian Empire, bruised from decades of wars with Byzantium, is already stretched thin when Arab armies push in from the southwest. You hear tales of battles at Qadisiyah and Nahavand, where Persian forces, despite valor and experience, falter against determined opponents, fueled by religious zeal and new strategies. The once mighty empire crumbles faster than anticipated, and cities you knew as bastions of Persian power fall under new flags. You see the tension in markets, where Persian merchants haggle alongside Muslim traders. The fire temples, once glowing bright, face diminishing congregations as Islam's call spreads. You watch as Zoroastrians face the dilemma of adaptation, resistance, or flight. Some convert, others retreat to mountains, or migrate eastward. The cultural mosaic begins to reconfigure itself. But Persia doesn't vanish. Instead, it transforms. Persian scholars become vital in the Abbasid Caliphate's golden court, translating texts, advising caliphs, and preserving ancient wisdom. You marvel at how Persian poetry, philosophy, and science influence the Islamic world. The Persian language gains new prestige, evolving into Dari and Tajik, becoming the lingua franca of vast regions. Meanwhile, new cities like Baghdad rise on ancient Mesopotamian soil, centers of learning, trade, and culture that echo Persia's legacy. You find hope in the resilience of art and intellect amid political upheaval. Yet beneath the surface, old identities simmer. The Persian spirit adapts, surviving through literature, architecture, and religious practice. The epic tales of Ferdowsi's Shahnameh will one day rekindle pride in a history that refuses to be forgotten. You light a candle in a small shrine, not knowing whether it's the last flicker or the first spark of a new dawn. Persia has fallen, yes, but Persia, in its essence, endures, hidden in words, in stones, in hearts. And that, my dear Emperor, is the paradox of history. Endings are often beginnings in disguise. Persia's story does not end with conquest or collapse. Rather, it morphs into a delicate dance with empire and faith, art and power. The centuries following the Arab conquest are marked by a subtle resilience, an undercurrent that courses through poets, scholars, and rulers who carry the Persian flame in new form. You find yourself in the courts of the Buyidids, and later the Seljuks, Persianate dynasties, who, though ruling under the banner of Islam, fiercely cultivate the pre-Islamic glory of Persia. The language of the court is Persian, filled with poetic grandeur that harks back to the kings of old. You overhear verses from Ferdowsi's Shahnameh, an epic composed to preserve Persian identity in the face of cultural change. It is a story of heroes, kings, and the eternal struggle between light and darkness, echoing the ancient Zoroastrian themes you once revered. You witness the blossoming of Persian art and architecture. Mosques and madrasas rise, their intricate tile work and soaring minarets, weaving Islamic faith with Persian aesthetics. Gardens bloom with geometric precision, reflecting a harmony between nature and human artistry. Music, too, flourishes, carrying melodies that will influence empires far beyond these lands. Trade routes pulse with life, connecting Persia to India, China, and the Mediterranean. Silk, spices, ideas, and inventions traverse these pathways, fostering an era of intellectual and cultural exchange known as the Islamic Golden Age. Scholars like Avicenna and Al-Farabi carry the torch of knowledge, blending Greek philosophy with Persian insight. But political power is fragmented. The Mongol invasions loom on the horizon, threatening to disrupt centuries of growth. You hear tales of Genghis Khan's forces sweeping through Central Asia, razing cities and uprooting dynasties. Persia braces itself for a new reckoning. Despite these threats, the Persian spirit persists, adaptive, proud, and deeply rooted in its past. The interweaving of ancient traditions with new influences creates a rich tapestry of culture that refuses to be erased. As night falls over your city, you look to the stars, remembering the fire temples, the great kings and the poets who sang of kingship and fate. Persia's story is not just one of conquest or loss. It is a testament to endurance and transformation. And so, dear Emperor, as you close your eyes tonight, let the echoes of Persia's past lull you into dreams, dreams of fire, poetry, and an empire that never truly dies. The dawn of the Mongol era is neither quiet nor gentle. You hear rumors at first, whispers of horsemen from the north, who move like shadows, their arrows sharper than winter's chill, their will as relentless as the desert sun. The 13th century opens with these whispers turning into roars that shake Persia's very foundations. You are no longer a young man. Your hair is more silver than black, but your heart pounds as if it's still racing alongside the riders who bring doom and, paradoxically, renewal. The Mongols arrive under Genghis Khan's successors, and their campaign is devastating. Cities burn, irrigation systems collapse, and the intellectual life you cherish is threatened with extinction. Baghdad, once a beacon of learning and culture, falls in 1258, its libraries consumed by flames, its scholars silenced. The Islamic Golden Age, so vibrant for centuries, suffers a blow from which it never fully recovers. But Persia is not merely a casualty. It becomes a stage for new rulers, the Ilkhanate, who adopt aspects of Persian culture even as they reshape the political landscape. You observe with a mix of awe and wariness as Mongol rulers convert to Islam, patronize Persian art and architecture, and revive cities. The destruction gave way to rebuilding, a phoenix rising from ashes stained with soot. You watch as Persian gardens bloom once more, where poets gather under the shade of cypress trees to craft verses that blend pain and hope. Persian miniature painting flourishes, intricate and delicate, a contrast to the brutal history recently endured. The language, poetry, and scholarship carry on, finding new patrons and new audiences. Trade routes reopen, with merchants travelling from China to Europe, their caravans laden with silk, spices, and stories. The Pax Mongolica, despite its violence, creates unprecedented connectivity across Eurasia, You ponder the irony, an empire built on conquest, enabling a renaissance of exchange. Yet beneath this cultural revival, tensions simmer. The Mongol elite struggle to reconcile their nomadic heritage with settled Persian civilization. You witness moments of brilliance, shadowed by bouts of cruelty and instability. And through it all, the people endure. You tell your grandchildren stories of fire temples and steel swords, of poets who sang beneath palace domes, of conquerors who came and went but never truly erased Persia. As twilight settles, you light a small lamp and look toward the stars, wondering what the next chapter holds. Because Persia's story is never finished. It is a living thread woven through time, fragile yet unbreakable. And that, my dear Emperor, is the greatest secret of all. The centuries slip by, and you watch Persia once again swirl in the tides of change, this time under the shadow of the rising Timurid Empire. Timur, or Tamerlane as outsiders call him, is a figure of legend and terror, part ruthless warlord, part patron of the arts. You hear stories that make your hair stand on end. Cities razed, populations uprooted, rivers diverted for conquest's sake. His campaigns leave scars as deep as those of the Mongols, yet also spark a vibrant cultural revival in their wake. You find yourself amidst a court that balances the terror of Timur's conquests with the beauty of Persian Renaissance. Poetry flourishes under his patronage. Artists and architects create masterpieces, blending Islamic motifs with ancient Persian grandeur. The city of Samarkand, his capital, becomes a jewel of culture and power, attracting scholars from across the world. Yet the fragility of empire is never far away. Timur's death in 1405 plunges his successors into turmoil, and Persia once again becomes a battleground for competing powers. You watch as the region fractures, yet the cultural heartbeat remains strong, refusing to be silenced by war or disunity. Trade continues to pulse through the Silk Road, connecting Persia to distant lands, while the arts and sciences flourish in pockets of peace. You see the flowering of Persian miniature painting, rich manuscripts illuminated by delicate brushstrokes, capturing tales of heroes, love, and mysticism. Despite political chaos, the Persian language and identity deepen, weaving together layers of history, religion, and culture into a tapestry uniquely resilient. You tell your grandchildren about heroes not just of battle, but of the pen and the brush, about poets like Hafez and Rumi, whose verses touch souls across centuries. As you sit by the flickering light of a lantern, you feel the pulse of Persia in every stone, every poem, every whispered prayer. It is a land perpetually reborn, sometimes through fire, sometimes through song. And so, dear Emperor, as your eyelids grow heavy, remember, empires may fall, cities may burn, but the soul of Persia sings on softly, fiercely, eternally. The world spins onward, and Persia stands at another crossroads. You find yourself in the early modern era, where new powers loom, Ottomans to the west, Mughals to the east, and European empires casting their long shadows across the globe. Persia, now under the Safavid dynasty, is reasserting itself with vigor, identity, and an unmistakable flair. Shah Abbas the Great, you hear, is a man who understands power. He rebuilds Isfahan into a city of shimmering domes, lush gardens, and bustling bazaars, a masterpiece that will be remembered as one of the world's most beautiful cities. You stroll through the Naksha Jahan Square, marveling at the intricate tile work, the perfect symmetry, the poetry etched in stone. It's an empire asserting not just might, but beauty. Religion sharpens identity. Twelver Shi'ism becomes the state religion, distinguishing Persia from its Sunni neighbors, and forging a powerful cultural and political unity. The Safavids enforce this with both zeal and sophistication, building mosques, supporting scholars, and weaving faith into the very fabric of society. Trade flourishes anew. Persian carpets, silks, and ceramics find their way to Europe and Asia, admired and coveted. You see merchants negotiating deals with Dutch and Portuguese traders, silk flowing as freely as coffee. The empire balances tradition and innovation with delicate grace. Yet the era is not without turmoil. Border wars with the Ottomans test military might and resolve. Internal court intrigues swirl like desert storms. You witness reforms and setbacks, moments of glory and episodes of decay. The Safavid dynasty, brilliant but brittle, carries the weight of centuries on its shoulders. You gather with friends under the shade of ancient trees, sharing stories of past kings and poets, of battles and gardens, of fire temples and new mosques. The world outside may be changing fast, but within Persia a steady rhythm persists, a song of endurance. As the evening breeze carries the scent of jasmine and spice, you let your mind drift to the future, to the echoes yet to come. For Persia's tale is far from over, and that can wait until you awaken. The echoes of empire now reverberate through a modernizing world, and Persia, soon to be called Iran, stands on the precipice of profound change. You find yourself in a land where ancient traditions and new ideologies clash and entwine, where the distant rumble of revolutions mixes with the silent resolve of those holding tight to identity. The Qajar dynasty rules with an uncertain grip. You witness the growing influence of European powers, the Russians encroaching from the north, the British eyeing the south. The discovery of oil transforms the land into a prize, coveted not just for its history, but for its resources. You watch as foreign concessions slice the country like a cake baked without invitation. The constitutional revolution brings hope, promises of democracy, law, and accountability. You cheer alongside the crowds in Tehran, waving banners for a parliament, a constitution, a voice beyond the palace walls. Yet the road is rocky. Political factions splinter, foreign intrigue weaves through the courts, and progress often feels like a slow march through desert sands. Reza Shah Pahlavi emerges, a force determined to modernize, to centralize, to remake Persia in a new image. Roads are paved, schools built, armies reformed. Yet with progress comes tension. Secularism challenges faith, westernization provokes tradition, and the old world scrambles to keep pace with the new. You see women donning modern attire, schools filled with eager minds, and cities expanding beyond ancient walls, but also protests, crackdowns, and whispers of unrest. The land is restless. As you walk the streets of Tehran, beneath banners both old and new, you feel the weight of history pressing forward. Persia's story is entwined with the currents of nationalism, religion, and revolution, a dance as old as the empire itself. And in this unfolding drama, you find hope mingled with uncertainty. So tonight, as the city lights flicker like stars caught in glass, close your eyes. Let the past and future blend softly in your dreams, for Persia's heart beats still, steady, enduring, unyielding. The final pages of Persia's epic are still being written as you lie down to rest. The 20th century roars in with revolutions, wars, and a restless search for identity. The Pahlavi dynasty's modernization efforts clash with centuries-old traditions. Foreign powers tug at sovereignty, and a people yearn for self-determination. You remember the oil fields and the pipelines, the foreign embassies buzzing with intrigue, and the young voices calling for change. The 1979 Islamic Revolution transforms the nation once more, replacing monarchy with a theocratic republic, faith with fervor, and old alliances with new complexities. Sanctions and conflicts shadow the land, but Persia, now Iran, remains a place of resilience, culture, and contradiction. You walk through Tehran's streets, where ancient bazaars hum alongside bustling modern markets, where poetry lives in cafes and protests echo through the squares. The past is never far etched in monuments, whispered in songs, alive in every heart. Persia's story, with its cycles of conquest, culture, and renewal, continues, unfinished, unpredictable, and deeply human. So, dear Emperor, as you drift into sleep, remember that history isn't just about kings and battles. It's about people, your people, living, dreaming, and enduring. And now, as the night deepens, let the weight of time gently carry you into rest. As the tapestry of Persia's history winds down, let your thoughts soften like the last ember of a fire, fading slowly into a comforting glow. Imagine the Zagros Mountains, bathed in moonlight, the quiet murmur of the royal road beneath the stars, and the scent of jasmine drifting through ancient gardens. The empire that rose and fell countless times lives on in stories, in art, and in the resilient spirit of its people. Breathe deeply, knowing that you are part of this endless thread, a witness to a story that never truly ends. Good night, my dear Emperor. Sleep well.